Remember that we cannot have a radical in the denominator. So we need to rationalize the denominator. In this case, since it's a binomial, we're going to need a conjugate. Right now we have subtraction as our operation. A conjugate would have the opposite operation of subtraction, which is addition. Let's multiply both the numerator and denominator by the conjugate. So I've set up my conjugate that I'm multiplying both the numerator and denominator by. On the top, I'm going to need distributive property because I have a monomial times two terms of a binomial. On the bottom, I have a binomial times a binomial. Normally we would need FOIL, but as we saw in class, the outside and inside terms end up canceling to 0, so we only need FL, which we abbreviated as Florida. Radical 3 times negative 1. Negative 1 is an outside number, so it's going to end up outside of the radical 3. So that means in the numerator I have negative 1 radical 3, which is just negative radical 3. You don't need the 1. And then radical 3 times radical 5, they're both radicals, so we multiply them to get radical 15, which is simplified, because if you did a factor tree, that would be 3 and 5, and there's no pairs. On the bottom, we're going to do first, which is negative 1 times negative 1. That's positive 1. So I did first, and now I have to do last. Negative times a positive is negative. Remember that that will always be a negative right there when we're multiplying a conjugate, because we're always going to have the opposite operations. And radical 5 times radical 5 is radical 25. But radical 25, or the square root of 25, is 5, because we have a pair of 5s that come out, and there's no more radicals, so that's over 5. And so let's simplify what we have for an answer here. Negative radical 3, remember we don't need the 1, plus radical 15 was simplified, all over 1 minus 5, which is negative 4. Now we can see if we have a number we can divide to make this simplified. So I'm looking at all of my outside numbers. I have a negative 1, a 1, and a negative 4. There's nothing we can divide all those by that will make anything simpler. So that's our answer. No more radical in the bottom, which was the whole point of finding the conjugate. Let's walk through another problem here. First of all, we have a radical in the denominator, but it's a binomial, so we're going to need a conjugate. What would be the conjugate of this problem? Pause the video until you're ready to see the answer. The conjugate, is 5 minus radical 2. And so I multiply both the numerator and denominator by that. Up top I have a monomial times a binomial, so I'm going to distribute. Radical 5 times 5. Well, the 5 is an outside number. Radical 5 is inside, so we don't multiply those together. Minus radical 5 times radical 2. They're both radicals, so let's multiply them together to get radical 10. Radical 5 and radical 10 are both simplified. If I did a factor tree, there would be no pairs. On the bottom, I'm going to need FL. So first, 5 times 5 is 25. Oops. Minus, remember I said it would always be minus because it's positive times a negative since they're opposite signs. And radical 2 times radical 2 is radical 4, but we know the square root of 4 is 2. So now to simplify what we have 5 radical 5 minus radical 10 all over 23. I check to see if I can simplify my outside numbers of 5, 1, and 23. I cannot, so that's my answer. For more practice, if you Google CUDA software worksheets dividing radicals, you will find some practice with answers. Good luck.